Welcome and Happy New Year. This is our first police question time of 2025. I'm Clare Moody, your Police and Crime Commissioner for Avon and Somerset. And every month I hold a live broadcast with Chief Constable Sarah Crew, where we ask Sarah to talk through and answer questions around the issues that you have raised with us, of issues about how policing is responding to the needs of the people of Avon and Somerset. So, welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Great to be here.
This month we're addressing two issues in particular, and those are the issues of drugs and shoplifting. And they're both issues that I am sure get raised with you when you're out and about, and they certainly are things that areas that people talk to me about across Avon and Somerset. So, going into the first of these issues, and that's the dealing with drugs.
Yeah.
And again, raised by so many people, I'll start with a question that actually has come into me from Ben. And he's been in touch to ask, and I'll ask it as a quote, why aren't the police tackling drug crime? You know exactly where the dealers are, and you could pinch them with evidence in no time. What's stopping that from happening? There's a couple of parts to that question. The first one is the broad question, which is, what is your approach to tackling drug crime?
Well, the first thing to say is we take drug crime very, very seriously. It causes a range of different issues. There's the obvious individual health issues, but there are significant links to other harms. So acquisitive crime, for instance, burglary, shoplifting, we talk about that later, often is driven by addiction. Similarly, there are links to domestic abuse, to violence in the nighttime economy, and to serious and organised crime as well. So we understand all of those harms. And
antisocial behaviour linked to it as well.
Absolutely. And we look to Dame Carol Black's, the most recent government strategy, From Harm to Hope, which looks at the enforcement aspect, which policing takes a responsibility for, but also that has to be done in tandem with treatment and with education. In each of our local authority areas, for instance, we have combating drugs partnerships which look at coordinating activity around those three things: education, treatment and enforcement. The responsibility for policing largely within that enforcement is around the enforcement of drug supply networks, often run by organised crime. But we also have some contribution to play towards treatment. So sometimes, we'll undoubtedly speak about it later, when we find people in drug use and possession, we may be diverting them towards our drug education programme, and certainly we have other areas that we can signpost people into treatment through drug testing on arrest. And I know there in Bristol there's an intensive supervision court, which looks to divert people from actually the criminal justice system into treatment and education. So as far as drug use goes, we're very much part of education, treatment, but our focus is where it needs to be, on the drug supply networks and organised crime. We've got some recent examples where community intelligence has come through. I can think of one particular recent success with Class A supply in Stapleton Road, that came from community intelligence, and one on Class A drugs production in South Bristol, really significant, and so I want people to know we do tackle this. That latter example, as I say, from community intelligence, we recovered 12.5 kilos of heroin, 10 kilos of cocaine, 14 kilos of amphetamine, £100,000 in cash, 6 people arrested, charged for 26 offences. Now that's community intelligence, that's us tackling. You can imagine the amount of harm, going back to that individual harm, that the volume of those drugs would have caused on our streets.
And there's clearly organised crime behind that as well, and as you say, arrests made with that, and working across, I know we have regional organised crime unit, we work with those, closely, very closely part of the regional organised crime unit.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a range of tactics available to us. They are both covert. People will know that we have the ability to do things using covert methods, surveillance, undercover policing, for instance, but we have very overt opportunities available to us. And, without going into the detail, to use some of those covert opportunities, we do need intelligence, so we need more intelligence. We can build a strong case. But we use all of those tactics, and I can assure people listening that everything that's available to us, from neighbourhood policing right up through our own proactive teams into the regional organised crime unit and the National Crime Agency, we can work to tackle and use all of those tactics, and sometimes in concert with each other.
And that there was that sort of other specific bit to Ben's question, which was around the intelligence, and he was highlighting that people see this happening in their communities. Why don't you just get on with it and go to the people that we all know are doing this in our communities?
Well, we may well be doing that in the background. So we're very intelligence led. We could always do with more community intelligence. Often that's passed to our neighbourhood policing teams. We also receive intelligence, and if people have it, through Crime Stoppers or through online reporting. But what we do, having gained it, is each piece of that is assessed, it's evaluated against other intelligence that we might have, other evidence and information by our intelligence teams. And we build a case, we build an intelligence case to act. So that may be to deploy covert tactics. It may be to do very overt policing activity in a particular area. It may involve the National Crime Agency, or it may involve just neighbourhood policing, or something in between. But just because when somebody rings in we don't respond in that moment, please be assured that every piece of intelligence that comes, every piece of information is reviewed, it's assessed, it's collated, and it's developed.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think just as a repeat plea as well, if people want to report anonymously, then that is what Crime Stoppers is there for, and they will feed that intelligence in directly into you as well. Absolutely.
Crime Stoppers is a separate organisation from the police. They exist to protect the source of the information. So I can guarantee, no matter how hard we try, if we wanted to ask Crime Stoppers to share the source of that information with us, they would not do so.
Yeah, even within Crime Stoppers, they keep it very clearly anonymous, and so to reassure people if they did want to report anonymously. So then finally on this is the other area that gets picked up frequently and talked about frequently, which is people just walking down the street and witnessing or smelling people using cannabis and smoking openly. So what's the policing response to this?
Well, I'm not sure that I've about increases in the smell, but what I can say is cannabis is Class C drug, it's illegal, Class B drug, it's illegal, and it causes harm, as I've said. And because it's illegal and it causes harm, then we will act against it. But our response will be proportionate, it will be in line with that strategy that I talked about, from harm to hope. So to give an example, so if we saw someone outside school gates at school leaving time, and they were clearly in sight of the children smoking cannabis, then that would call for some very robust action. But that would be different perhaps than somebody smoking cannabis in their own home. Now, the action will still be taken, but it will be proportionate to where that harm is being caused. So, as I've said, if it's a first time use, and there are no aggravating circumstances, the right approach for the long-term benefit of the individual and the community might be education and the drug education programme. But where there are aggravating circumstances, like an example that I've given, or there's violence involved, or there's harm caused to vulnerable people, or indeed it's repeat, so somebody's had a chance for education, then the approach would be much more robust, looking at arrest and prosecution.
And consequence, absolutely. So that brings us on to our second topic, which is another area of great interest in our communities, and that is around shoplifting. Can we start with kind of highlighting some data that about shoplifting in Avon and Somerset and increases that has been seen? So there were headlines over the new year around a 25% increase in shoplifting in Avon and Somerset. And this was, a particular part of that was a 50% increase in the Baines area, the Bath and North East Somerset area. So we've had a very straightforward question in from Diane, who has asked, what are you going to do to stop the rise in shoplifting?
Well, so you're absolutely right about the data. It's actually 24.2 over the last 12 months across the force area. And the largest increase is in Bath and North East Somerset, just over 50%, I think. So in real terms, that's 2.5 offences per day, if you can have a 0.5 aggregated up, to just over 5 offences a day. I mean, this is in the context of a national increase. We're seeing the highest levels, and we've heard about it in the news and being discussed in 20 years. I'd say we're also working really hard to improve reporting. We're working with retailers and partners to do that. We need to know what the data says to be able to target it effectively. I still think it's underreported, so we can expect to see levels rising. But by having the right information, that gives us the best chance of being in the right places to tackle it as it's happening, and also to do work to prevent it as well. So, there are very many reasons why this might be happening, and we need to look at each one of those discreetly and have a strategy to deal with them.
So on that your particular part of the response around the rise in numbers and looking to increase the reporting, I know from many conversations, and again I'm sure you've had the same conversations, where you get told about shoplifting incidents and and the regularity of them, or a particular hotspot area, and then the more you kind of ask the questions, the more it comes back that actually people aren't reporting. Sometimes that's because they think they've reported previously and they don't feel there's been a response, or sometimes it's for all sorts of reasons. There are internal inside chains. They've got internal reporting systems that may or may not come to the police. But if we are successful in getting, if there's a success in getting the additional data through reporting, it then needs an additional response as well.
Yeah, what I can guarantee is we don't attend every report of shoplifting. We prioritise according to threat, harm and risk, and we may discuss that a little bit later. But what I can guarantee, and I think it's important to say, every report of shoplifting is investigated. And actually our rate of solving shopliftings, despite not attending every single one of them, is actually higher than our overall response, our overall performance at solving crime. So we solve about 16% of them. So we do investigate every single one, and I wouldn't want people to feel that I won't report because nothing will be done. Yeah. It will be investigated.
That's very good to know. So we've talked about the increase in statistics in relation to encouraging and perhaps receiving more reporting.
Yes.
As a consequence of that. But what other factors do you think are underlying the increase? And is there a connection to the first topic that we discussed in terms of drugs?
Yeah, I think so. So there are a variety of things. So there's what we're seeing is the cost of living crisis. Some people are stealing to put food on the table. We are seeing criminal gangs being involved, often not local criminal gangs, but criminal gangs who are stealing in bulk or to order, and that can be also for very highly desirable items for passing on. We're also seeing, as you said, prolific offenders. So that's often driven by addiction as well. So I think we've got those three different factors to deal with very different profiles. The organised crime, nationally, there is an initiative called Operation Opal, which is being partly funded by large retailers alongside the police to tackle those gangs, again, organised crime, who are moving between different parts of the country. But I think when it comes to the cost of living and that particular typology offending, and particularly the prolific offenders, that's for local policing to deal with, and that's where our focus is.
And that exactly that kind of goes again to the earlier point around intelligence, because people, shopkeepers in particular, but also communities may well know who those prolific offenders are, and getting that information.
Yes, absolutely. And clearly, the effort that needs to be put into those involve a range of different partners. Now, clearly the role for enforcement is with the police and with criminal justice agencies as well. But when you look at issues as cost of living and there are things that can be done in concert with other partners much earlier in the process to prevent this happening in the first place. But I think particularly with the challenges within our prison estate as well is what we do in terms of rehabilitation. And helping people, particularly where there is addiction, to stop them reoffending, because quite often it's quite a long way down the path of offending before they are actually in a prison establishment receiving treatment or help.
And indeed it is offenders coming out of prisons as well, and making sure that there is that continuity, that they have the support. So, following on from that, what can shopkeepers expect if they experience shoplifting on their premises as well?
Well, the first point we've already made, we'd always encourage people reporting to us. We don't attend every shoplifting. We'd like to, but the reality of our resourcing and sometimes the threat, harm and risk of other things that might be happening in that moment mean that we can. When we can, we prioritise shoplifting, but we will, particularly if there are aggravating circumstances, do everything to attend. Now, that might be where there are violence or threats of violence or weapons seen or threatened. It might be where someone has already been detained. So, they've been detained in the store. It might be where there's a repeat or a known prolific offender. We will do our very best to get to those offences and be able to respond. But as I've said before, even if we don't attend in that initial instance, we investigate and pursue every line of inquiry that we've got, because if we have repeat offenders, we will then start to build up as we did with the intelligence and drugs, a picture of all the offending they're committing and the characteristics of their type of offending. So we pull all those offences together. So when we do detain them, it won't be just dealing with the one offence. It may be dealing with a number of offences that are attributable to them. And we've seen just within the last couple of months significant success actually from our neighbourhood teams, in concert from a small team that work in our desktop team who try to find the links and pull all these things together. We saw a woman charged with 8 offences at Co-op in Barton Hill. We've seen another case, again, where we didn't attend in the first instance, in Barton Hill, in Bristol North, where PCSO later attended, secured CCTV, was able to identify the offender, made sure that was available to colleagues in the area. Colleagues saw that person, arrested them. They were in possession with items from another offence, as well as drugs and a knife as well. So we are very proactive where we can be. In December, we had Operation Glitz running in Taunton. That was very much focused with very precise patrolling, which was both determined to be in the right places, to be high profile where you needed to be, but also targeting prolific offenders. And we've seen a number of successes from there. 6 people have found their way to prison, and as I said before, it's quite far down the offending pathway before somebody reaches the threshold where they're in prison. They've often been arrested, charged, released on bail 3 or 4 times before that happens. So from those examples, and I could give many more, we are having some success by both being in the right places, intelligence-led, but also tackling those repeat offenders.
And those examples are really, really useful. Because I think one of the things that matters is, because as you said, the report comes in, there isn't necessarily an immediate response. Then there is work done behind the scenes, and so sometimes I think what gets lost is the consequence and the feedback of that consequence to people, and that leads to a loss of faith that there is action taken. And have you got thoughts about how we can improve that narrative line and that communication?
Well, I checked on that, actually. I think you're absolutely right. The story of Taunton actually was subject to a story in the local media. We are doing our best to put those stories out there, but in the world of social media and everything, and people getting their news in different ways, it's hard to cut through. Similarly, we've had some success in North Bristol, crossing over into South Gloucestershire as well, with some, a group of prolific offenders where we did something different that we're increasingly doing to prevent offending. Is after people have been charged, is seeking antisocial behaviour legislation, so criminal behaviour order or a civil injunction on top of the conviction, so that we can place an exclusion zone around where you cannot come to these areas, and if you breach that commits another offence, or to compel people to go into treatment. So that too was a story that we circulated through local media and through our own, our website and social media channels. So we are trying to do that, and today is a really good example for me to signpost that again. But we are having successes. We will continue to try to get the message out that we are having successes, and the more information that we have, the more offences are recorded, yes, but the more chance we have for tackling, particularly those repeat offenders, and I would say the organised crime aspect, the national initiative is having some success as well. And
it underlines again the importance of the neighbourhood teams, because as you said, there are those mechanisms of getting the message out through various media and social and broadcast and print and media, but also the neighbourhood teams know their shopkeepers.
Yes.
So there needs to be that communication from those teams to the community directly to say this, order is in place, these individuals are excluded, or and these consequences have happened.
It completely underpins the value of neighbourhood policing in this context, particularly those who are working in the city centre and the town centre teams. Because you're absolutely right, they know who those offenders are. And even if they don't know their name, they build up a picture of their description, they're out and they spot them. As I gave that example, that was a local neighbourhood officer. That's the team working in concert. So, there are challenges and there are draws on the time of our neighbourhood teams, but it does underpin the value and the brilliant work that they do, which often goes unseen.
And their connections into their retailers, and that conversation with them.
And absolutely, and I know supported by your office is the Business Crime Forum, which operates at a kind of a strategic level with partners and retailers across Avon and Somerset, and that offers us some direction and oversight and some support and challenge as well. But I think at a local level, those business crime reduction partnerships, the business improvement districts, the Chamber of Commerce, neighbourhood teams working in concert are having some real successes actually. And To working together, we identify the prolific offenders, things like those criminal behaviour orders. That's a new initiative which, working together, we can stop people entering those areas and help them into treatment. But there's also things to do around just old-fashioned, basic crime reduction. And again, our neighbourhood teams and some of our specialists who support neighbourhood teams are designing out crime officers. We can offer advice about protection and how things are arranged and crime prevention, but also help with training of staff as well.
Because that is a really important feature. It is. There has to be, the police have to deal with the consequences of shoplifting having happened.
Yeah.
But there are designing out of specialisms inside the police in, both, kind of planning, but also, as you say, what can shopkeepers do to prevent shoplifting happening in the first place?
Absolutely. And working in partnership. I mean, I go back to how we started the conversation. Sometimes for our prolific recidivist offenders, drugs and alcohol are often the driving factors. So as we work forward, one aspect we'd like to, we have a track record in Avon and Somerset as partners in things like integrated offender management, but how we reduce reoffending by tackling some of those drivers for people. I'd be interested to see how much further we can drive that forward. While the prison situation is as it is, it's really important that we're working hard on rehabilitation as well as prevention and deterrence in the first place.
Yes, we reduce reoffending as well as offending in the first place. And are there any final words for retailers around that design point, or I know there are you talked about bids and the schemes that are out there for retailers to talk with each other about what's going on. Are there other things that you think they could be doing or picking up on?
I think the key thing is to engage with their neighbourhood teams. We have a force lead, a chief inspector called Rebecca Wells-Cole, who leads for us, but she has a lead in each of our neighbourhood policing areas who will be focused on how can we take that good practice and sharing of good practice, and how can we manipulate it into the local context. So rather than make it really complicated for people, contact your neighbourhood teams, expect to see them, invite them round, and we can talk about what we can do.
Thank you, Sarah. And indeed, I am meeting with Chambers of Commerce later this week as well, so I have no doubt this will be a topic of conversation when I am talking to representatives from Bridgewater and Taunton on this as well. So again, thank you for your time, Sarah, this afternoon, and for talking to those really important subjects. I hope you have found this month's PQT interesting and useful. They always pick up on questions that you, the public, have sent in, so please do keep those questions coming. If we don't highlight them in this month's PQT, we keep the questions and we group them to topics that we will deal with later in the year as well. So once again, thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing you at the next PQT in February.